Yeah, I can hear you good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. How are you?
Good. It's been a pretty good
Good.
day.
I got a bit worried in there. I thought that maybe maybe the time zones got mixed up or something.
No, I thought it did, but no, it's totally fine. I had a few calls go over a little bit.
Oh, that's perfectly fine. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no worries.
I was just worried. That's why I dropped in an email. So how are you doing?
Good.
Good. Okay. So let me introduce you to our audience first, and let me take a few minutes to warm up to them. Okay. So, hello and welcome everybody to Odetta's Tech Live session. I'm your host, Sajal Malik, live from Karachi, Pakistan. And we have set up this intriguing session to talk about how AI is impacting the fashion industry. So, not wasting another minute, let me introduce our guest. Tonight, we have a research oriented leader in data science and fashion here and with us. Data science is such a buzzword, but we haven't heard much of a blend of fashion and data science together, especially in the MESA region. So, our guest tonight is an expert on personalization and product innovation. She did design at, I have really huge trouble in pronouncing this, but I hope I do it right. It's Oscar de la Renta. I
Yeah.
hope it's fine. Yep. Okay. Good. And then data science at Ralph Lauren, and then consultation for Burberry, G Star, and many other amazing high-end brands. So let's welcome the chief data officer and founder of an amazing brand that I am still having a really big
With Gloria.
Sepluria, Jessica Graves. Hi,
Thank you
Jessica.
so much.
So how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. We're having it's a global world now, so it's nice to be connected with everybody.
So how's the COVID situation impacting your productivity as a chief data officer?
I think I've always been remote and distributed, so it wasn't such a shock for me, but it was a shock for a lot of different clients and just I think everybody's remote now. They weren't planning to be, whereas I'm planning and doing it for 3 years, so it was helpful.
So Sephiria has always been like a distributed team.
Yeah, I've always been set up to be remote so I can have clients anywhere in the world. I don't have to physically be present to do anything. If we're talking data strategy, especially, a lot of the things are online, so there's no specific reason to physically be in an office.
So data confidentiality being such a big issue, how does that work out?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some trickiness around if you're actually moving data around, but I'm really focusing on how to help my clients get smarter about how they make those decisions. I'm not necessarily like a data analytics agency. I don't necessarily need to be set up for like bringing their data in and out of my kind of servers or anything like that. I'm teaching them how to be smarter about what decisions they make on their platforms.
That's great. So Jessica, let's get to know you as a person a little more. So as a kid, tell us a little about the teenage Jessica, academically, personally, and a bit socially.
Yeah, for sure. I think when I was younger, I mean, I figured out that I wanted to do fashion pretty young. And in my family, there was not a lot of separation between art and science. It was very much, if you wanted to be an artist, you could be an artist. If you want to be a scientist, you be a scientist. They weren't seen as completely separate fields. I had an engineer father who also was a painter. I had a mother who was like a sales executive, and they had met at art school. So there's just nothing, around that said that you couldn't mix fields and you couldn't, you know, own your own business. You couldn't, be successful in a bunch of different ways. So, I mean, I probably started reading Vogue when I was 12, and I just found the language there that I didn't see anywhere else. And I was like, well, this is really interesting. This is touching on something I just don't have any other words for and pictures of and images of. So I knew I always wanted to be in the fashion industry. That was just a no-brainer. But I also realized there are a lot of different ways you could contribute. And so that's kind of how my career path developed.
So so in like the crossroads, even when you decided that you wanted to do fashion, when did you fall in love with data?
Yeah, it's funny. I might not even be in love with data now. I think data and And machine learning and AI research, I won't even say AI, like just the research coming out has a lot of opportunities for the fashion space. And I care about data because it makes us better at scaling fashion and luxury. And it makes us better able to be profitable. It makes it easier for independent brands to stay independent. It makes it better if you're a conglomerate. It makes it easier to like keep all the brands healthy. So I don't know if I even care about data per se. I think it's, building statistical models is very fascinating in itself. So math as a field in itself is very interesting. But I'm not someone who cares. I'm not obsessed with the data. I'm obsessed with what we can do with it and how it can change how we think about the industry.
So you're really a good researcher. I've studied a bit about you. So what was it that you felt like that is not being done already, and that is something that led you to build up Cephluria?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me when I started was I wanted to be independent of a specific platform. I thought if I'm not going to call the shots or be the CEO of a software platform, it's really hard to tell someone that you need this platform and there's nothing else out there for you. I just couldn't say that. And at the same time, I didn't want to hop from brand to brand and slowly work up some invisible ladder and try to influence that way. So I knew that being on the outside made things move so much faster. When I saw who was coming into our brands, consultants on the outside moved things really quickly. And we already had lots of software, we just weren't using it that well. So my philosophy was I want my customers to lead smarter than I do. And I don't want to, that's the same reason I'm not a data agency. I know so many agencies where the brand itself has nobody internally and all of that knowledge is external. So if they cancel their contract, nobody in the company is going to know anything that happened over the past 10 years about how they make decisions or how they view data. So I always saw that as that's a philosophy I subscribe to. I'd much rather make the industry smarter and walk away and maybe not, I don't necessarily have my customers' data, but they know how to use it better. And they're able to benefit from me seeing lots of different situations and bringing them the most relevant ones.
When you were observing all these patterns on how people don't know how to make better decisions, when did that insight kick in, and how did that drive you to? So basically, Cephluria has an AI algorithm, if I understand correctly. So how does that help them make better decisions?
Yeah, so I would say more so that we help companies go internally and build the decision support systems they need. So there might be decisions that can directly just be supported by the presence of some data that wasn't known before. But for the most part, you're going to have to put it into something you believe about how it works and then test it. Or you're going to have to deliver, you have 1 million customers and you want to customize all their emails, you can't do one by one. Either you end up making okay, there's 6 segments and these are their personas, and you just send those 6 out and hope for the best, or you can train an algorithm to recognize what each individual wants or what maybe 10,000 segments want. And that has nothing to do with, that's not something a marketer can just do in their head, right? It doesn't work. So I teach them to look for what are the decision support systems I need. And for the most part, the ones that are built to deliver an experience come from AI research. Again, we don't have true AI. It doesn't even make sense yet. But the research that's going into that is super useful right now. And for the most part, there's not a lot of cross-pollination in the fashion industry to do that. So I saw the business decision as being important, and also seeing the difference between, in my career, I always had to justify financially what I was doing. Was I saving time? Was I saving money? Was I creating money for the companies? And my mentors who were at startups or tech companies never had to do that. They were kind of just experimenting. And so I was surprised when I learned that other people didn't have to justify the financial results of their work or have to prevent, a lot of money from being lost. They were funded by capital. And so they weren't focused on profitability. So they really just didn't care. They were just doing experiments. So when I realized that, and the other thing was something 80% of AI and digital transformation projects don't have a return on investment. And so seeing those facts where I'm like, okay, everything I've done had to have a return, but the industry is not doing that in general. Okay, I should probably help people be part of that 20% or expand that 20%. Because we're spending a lot of money on innovation, and then people think it doesn't work, and then they never invest in it again. And lo and behold, they just get, maybe they don't survive as companies in the long term.
So how do you make them realize? For example, I'm like generically, fashion industries do not really have those technical backgrounds or are not technically aware of what they can do. How do you convince them? How do you pitch this idea to them?
Yeah, I mean, I always say the minute you're convincing, you've already lost. So I try not to convince anybody of anything. I would say less that the whole fashion industry is behind, and more that there are the most advanced and the least advanced people in terms of digital transformation are in the fashion industry. So there's people who are buying startups who are, have a really sophisticated data science team. Things are working really well for them. And then there's people who literally everything's on paper. They don't even have like a place to query. They can't answer basic questions for months about what was our traffic last month, or how did this campaign do, or how many units did we sell? Like those are huge questions that take months to answer. So we have that whole spectrum in the fashion industry, first of all. But yeah, I'm not there to convince. I try to help them identify what would be the most valuable thing you could do now versus in 6 months versus next year versus how that's going to look over the next 3 years. Because currently there's just a lot of money being spent with people they trust who are really big companies who are just trying to sell them really big platforms that work in other industries, but maybe don't make any sense for fashion or don't make any sense for luxury. So it's way less about convincing. It's really just like, let's play a game where we find money. And like, nobody doesn't want to play that game.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So you set up this own company. You were the founder for Safuria. What were some troubles or struggles that you faced when you were trying to set it up?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing was the mindset that works for working at a company is the complete opposite of what works for an entrepreneur. So you kind of need to undo everything you've ever learned about how success works and be a little bit crazy, because there's so many companies fail. And I didn't understand how much of a process that was going to be, especially for me having worked at companies for so long. And the other thing I think was missing was understanding what are the ways that you can structure engagements that make it very easy versus more difficult for a company to say yes to. Those are probably the biggest things. It's like you can have a lot of expertise and talent, but turning that, you almost have to be a product manager for that service. And once you get out of software, there's not a lot of great reads or guides on like, how do you product manage a service? Because the people who are creating all that information about tech and product management, they tend to be VC-backed companies. And so they only want stuff that scales a lot. Services businesses, especially if they're based on talent, don't have great margins. They don't want to invest in that stuff. So there's not a lot of noise about how do you make services work and scale. So I found that there was a lot of creating stuff from scratch, whereas like if I wanted to build a software product, there are tons of resources.
That I can totally understand that. But as a like when you're building a team, when you're bringing in this vision, how does that work out eventually? How do you eventually have a unified identity as a team, as a small team, and then eventually you enlarge that?
Yeah, so I think for me, I think scaling comes less from, I always work with partners and I work with people who are other experts or other kind of independent consultancies, people who found software startups. I have a lot of relationships and partners. I'm not particularly looking to scale just by adding people. And so for me, it's more about if someone's gonna join with you as a partner and say like have some kind of deal with you, their respect comes from your mission and your vision and how you treat them. And so it doesn't really matter if it's an employee or a partner or investor or anything else. They all need to know your mission. And so I find people will talk to me because I have a very specific mission, and because I'm very transparent for the most part about like how things work or what I want to do in the industry. Whereas, there's a lot of people who, or in general, they're not just they're not trying to evaluate whether we should work together based on like numbers or how many clients do you have or any of those questions. They're really just like, we're trying to get something done and make this industry different. And so they'll give me their time, or we'll share it, or we'll work on big projects together. So I think the biggest thing is just being focused on making the industry healthier.
So, what is that one use case that you thought that would be exciting? As like, for example, you had some insights from working before, and then you took up this business, or you took up this client, and then you thought, hey, this is something new for me. So how was that different from what you usually had come across from, and how did you figure that out? Like, any insights or something like that?
Yeah, so I think there's a big misconception, and I'm not sure I had it or not, but there's definitely I think early on I positioned so much as like data scientist, and there's a lot of value in having a data scientist inside of a company, but the main problems people were having were strategic. And so positioning as someone who's going to like, oh, can I just call you can you just write some code for me? We have 10 data scientists. It was great if we had 11 for like a couple weeks or a couple months and then go back away. And it was very hard for me to understand why they're positioning me in that way, when I was like, no, I can tell you how to get 20, the equivalent of productivity of 20 data scientists with your 10. That's the point, right? So it was, I think for me, I made a lot of great relationships with people, but they saw me as like, oh, let's just try to hire as a data scientist, whether it was contractor or employee. They were just like, that's so valuable, so hard for us to find. And that's what they got stuck on. And I didn't know how to position out of that early on. But then I started to learn how to position differently and speak differently, talk directly to the C-suite, make sure the words I was using, the body language, everything was oriented around how to build them a solid strategy. So that was probably the biggest learning. I think in general, like tech people think that they have some secret knowledge, and it's so powerful because they get paid so much more than normal. And they start to think like, I know some secret, and I'm going to have this secret thing that other people don't understand or aren't smart enough to understand, and I'm going to come in there and save them. And it's like, this industry's been around for, I don't know, hundreds of years, or at least 100+ years. How can I expect this thing that we invented yesterday is going to, how can I not respect the amount of work and intuition and all the other aspects of creating a successful company? Like, how can I not respect that? You got to come in with respect. So because I had the production background, the design background, I'd seen like, how does this whole system work? And so people just feel good opening up to me because they understand that I know the work that goes in, and I'm not just coming and saying like, I know these secrets, you should hire me so you can have them. It's like, you guys are geniuses. Like, how do we make this more profitable for you so that you can keep making more beautiful stuff in the world? So I think that's probably the biggest, like kind of mental shift you have to make if you're going to work in an industry like this.
There is a great, huge learning curve in positioning yourself differently. Like, you just talked about your body language, the words you were using. What were some things that you changed? So, for example, there was something that you used to do before, and you took some notes, and now you do it differently. So, I think that would be something you would benefit from.
Yeah, I don't think anything's the same. Hopefully, nothing's the same. I mean, definitely the way you talk to people, the way you negotiate, the minimum fees I was charging, how I stack different products together to put together a solution, the way I viewed my relationships. I think the biggest thing that I saw, especially trying to get a lot of help on business development, was people were very much focused on, don't do anything for free. Don't do anything for free. Show your worth. We're women. We have to stand up for our fees. And it got really into this conversation around like how to go from, okay, I know there's another male speaker getting paid and I'm not, or whatever it was, to like, I need to assert my fee. And that mentality helps a little bit. It'll get you like, let's say, a speaker fee on something that's that someone else is paid and they offered you nothing, and then you negotiate so you get paid. So that's great, but then I didn't realize for a long time that that wasn't the that wasn't the value. There was like exponentially more value in being placed in the same room as people who would like to work with you, who could make that decision, who were now seeing you on a stage and seeing you next to people they already knew and trusted, and the conversations that came out of that, and how to turn that into business, and how to turn that into ongoing relationships and connect them to the right people. I didn't really feel like I had a blueprint from that from anybody. I signed up for speaker things. They taught me how to speak. I signed up for business, development. They taught me about business, but nobody really showed me that how to connect those dots of like, yeah, I'm here, I'm speaking, it's a great room. How do I go from what I literally at this point, if I'm going to speak, not in something that's just super informal, but if I'm going to give a keynote, I already know how every minute is going to go. I don't have a script. I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm not that kind of, I cannot write a script and read a script. It's not happening. But I know every minute what I'm going to say and what that thing is going to do to the minds of the audience, and how that's going to collapse to some end goal I want us all to have by the end of the talk. And I never did anything like that in my life. I don't know. I just, I've been on panels and stuff, but it's very designed, it's very systematic, and each word choice, what words I don't say, how many slides do I have, where's humor, where's my story, how do I talk about my story, where do I, everything is designed. And so people will call me and say, can you come speak about this? And I'll be like, well, I can't, because it won't get you the result you want. Tell me more about what you're trying to do, and I'll design a talk to fit that. But there's no, people really think what you see is what you get. Someone came, they said these things, they left, and it's like, no, there's a whole back end to
that. Just listening to this, I just got reminded how you're into building personalized recommendations. So a lot of research goes into that. There's this, as you said, that you do customer segmentation. Then there are different ways that you can hit the audience. What are some key factors that you think that most of the industry is not doing right now, and they should be getting those into their system?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, unfortunately, I've been saying the same. I think it's probably the same answer I would have had 5 years ago, which is unfortunate. But most people try to apply the methods that work really, really well for Netflix and Amazon, and just kind of copy and paste them and use them in fashion. And honestly, it's the most innovative companies, which didn't actually succeed as companies, were really about going beyond just doing, let's say, collaborative filtering, which is really standard, and altering it in a way that would work where you don't have, the products themselves are very different from each other, and the people who come to look for them have very different needs. I think even just separating, I'm a multi-brand retailer, or I'm a single brand, or I'm a single brand with 5 products, or I'm a media company. I have content. I have lots and lots of content. Nobody's doing, at first, even just splitting up how you would have to alter a recommendation system for those situations. I'm seeing it in the conferences. So really, even companies like Walmart, et cetera, are going to these conferences, and they have an insane bunch of PhDs working on this stuff nonstop. But as far as how that's spread across the industry, it's nobody's using the research outside of the few companies that are producing it. And so it's really just about people actually paying attention to what works. What works for Walmart might be terrible for an individual brand, but might be great for, how you have to look at, if you're a content company, how do you serve up the recommendation of the content? Nobody's using, I mean, to some extent, depending, people are not very transparent, but how can you understand how every word that's in an article, get AI to go through and read the words and understand the wording? What kind of wording does this person like? What kind of topics do they like? What are the next few things I could recommend to them that aren't just recent? What might they want to what would make them stay longer and keep reading? If you're a fashion company, it's how do we go beyond other people also like this? Click here. Here's some stuff from the same brand. here's some stuff that's the same silhouette. Like we're not using silhouette super well. We're not using all the data that's available, and we're not putting into a system that can detect micro communities and not just kind of flatten everybody to the same kind of group. So I mean, it's getting a little better, but it's not ubiquitous. It's not spread out to all the companies. There's a few. They're doing all of the innovation, and nobody's reading the papers. Nobody even knows there are papers for it.
I can totally understand that. In a small final year project that I was working on, I came across some papers and I did not know such combinations of such amazing research existed. So, is there any really funny example of collaborative filtering that you came across, and then that point you could use against making people understand why collaborative filtering is not the answer to their marketing solution?
I think it's harder for like if you're a multi-brand, it's really difficult. Um, I can't think of a good kind of funny example, but I mean, we see it when we use platforms where you buy it's changing a little bit again with the companies that are innovating pretty quickly. It changes now, but there's this stereotype that we understand from interacting. Like I bought a pair of blue jeans and now I just get blue jeans forever. They don't ever show me anything else. That's what they show me when I make the purchase. That's what they show me when I come back. Um, and it's like maybe I need something to go with them, or maybe wait, 6 months and I'll buy a bunch again. Or, what about the things that are silhouetted nicely? So like Farfetch has done some research in that space. A lot of companies have, but most people don't talk about it. They don't publish it. The startups, some of them publish everything open source. Some of them are using the stuff that's open source, not developing it, not sharing. And so there's just a lot of asymmetry in the industry, and there's a lot of like knowledge keeping, where we know that you can train a deep learning algorithm to understand silhouette and understand this is a shirt versus a dress versus whatever else. But it's not necessarily getting spread out to everybody. It's just staying kind of concentrated in a few companies. So like you really want to know the silhouette of something. You really want to know even internally at the company, is this item similar to an item we sold before? This new item we want to sell, is it similar to something before? It's not going to be in the words, it's not going to be in the description, it's going to be in the silhouette. So you need a computer vision to do that. Most companies
Yes.
don't really get it.
So most of the fashion brands and fashion industries, they don't really work on the content that's on their websites. They're mostly about graphics. So basically, there are all these amazing jeans and tops that they have up there, but there's no description down there. How does that impact the kind of market that they're reaching, and what would you suggest to those kind of templates?
I would say, like, I mean, first of all, there's a lot of, let's say, even in the luxury space, a lot of companies don't have websites. So we even have to get away from the idea that AI and machine learning research is for websites and consumer. We can use algorithms to do inventory. We can use algorithms to do how, given like this amount of fabric I need to order, where should I order it from? Where should I send it to? How many of each item should I cut? We can even move off of the consumer facing stuff. I feel like the consumer stuff people sort of get, like they know that they should try a bunch of recommenders. They know that they should have some kind of fancy customer relationship database that's like making relationships between customers, but they don't understand that they can use the same research on products problems that are happening, whether or not they have a website, whether or not they're in store, to help optimize where they're sending and moving inventory around. Like that's still a little bit new. Again, some companies are starting to use existing technologies for it that aren't really tuned well for fashion, but it's still like it's kind of like, there's a lot of excitement around it and people are trying stuff and some of it doesn't work, but nobody's really saying like this is why that didn't work and here's an alternative, or we're really missing a lot of use cases.
What is that one business or one use case that you made the most impact at? Because that's what you're all about.
I would say forecasting. So it's showing clients how, even if they're small, depending on, small in fashion can be like, hundreds of millions of dollars, but that's fine. So no matter what size they are, whether they're under 100 million or over a billion, like showing them how to control their inventory and how they can use algorithms to make predictions about what's going to happen next, and it's better than hand waving or it's better than whatever they're doing before. They can produce the right colors in the right season, the right sizes, the right at the right time, the right silhouettes, and giving them that power is like, I mean, people are still using things we built years ago because it helps them control their waste. It helps them decide what to produce. It helps make their customers happier because all the stuff they want is there when they expect to buy it. So that's probably the biggest that's the biggest thing, is giving a brand control over their inventory and understanding um, how they're able to make those decisions in a supported way instead of in an unsupported way, or taking many hours or hundreds of hours or dozens of hours to do the same analysis.
So the simpler the better. Does that work over here?
Sorry, say again.
The simpler the better. That's this phenomenon that everybody tries to adopt. So would that work for the fashion industry? Like, how they're going extravagant into bringing in new stuff, the designs, the experiments that are going on. Would it be like, no, the more complicated or the more features that they're thinking about, that is more important, or the simpler the better works better in this industry?
Um, I think it depends on. I mean, every company is a little bit different in the size and shape, and well, how many items, what kind of items, how many types, how many brands do you have. I mean, it's kind of custom for everybody. I wouldn't say there's any. I don't think there's a playbook for just the fashion industry. There's a lot within it. So, yeah, I would never say there's a sweeping statement I can make about this always works, because that's the point. It doesn't, and so you have to like really look at the levers you can pull.
So I've been wanting to ask, since I've been having so much trouble in pronouncing it, what does Cephaloria really mean?
That's a good question. You used to ask me in sixth grade. I made it up when I was 11, and I had to take French and Spanish at the same time. And to me, it meant like to flower yourself, like to decorate yourself. And so, it's something. It's just a name I was using for a long time, and it was a natural kind of thing to make it, something very Googleable. But it's nobody else using that name on Google, so it's really about how do we decorate ourselves, how do we dress ourselves, and that's what it's always meant to me. Um, but yeah, I always ask people what it sounds like it means, and it's usually much more interesting.
That's an interesting way of naming an AI product.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a service business. It's literally just me. So it's like something that will always be there. There may be products I build and launch other companies, or maybe events, but this is like the kind of core. It'll always be some kind of services business for top of a conglomerate chain.
So during your research, did you ever feel like the kind of impact that you want to make and the kind of research that has been done so far, there's a huge gap, or what opportunities do you think still exist, or something that needs to be worked on?
Yeah, I mean, so we're working on right now a report on. So there's a lot of literature on sustainability and machine learning, and there's a lot of literature on fashion and sustainability, but there's not a lot of clear guidelines on where the gaps are in fashion's ability to achieve sustainable development or achieve sustainable business practices, and a map of like, okay, what machine learning methods would work really well, which ones are not useful at all, where are more simple solutions required. Like, there's just not a good map, and so that's something I think is really important to put together. Is like machine learning for sustainable fashion specifically, and get really clear about what's still missing, what's technology in general still missing outside of AI. Like, there's people working on recycling fibers, and how do you get a garment if most of them are mixed polyester and cotton? How do you separate them so that you can use the fibers again? Like, we do not have a circular industry until you have a way to massively collect fabric waste and separate it and use it again. So what's that whole map of what's missing? How can technology help? How can AI and machine learning research help? And which goals specifically in sustainable fashion would that affect?
So we've talked a lot about AI and how insights are important. So, any particular tools or techniques that people need to start learning about or need to look into that you would suggest to the audience?
I think most companies don't do Bayesian statistics very well, and if they did, they probably would not be sucked into a lot of hype. I'll say that. That's probably the most useful thing for the cases we have in fashion. And so that also touches on what's missing is like, how do we do Bayesian computations in a really efficient way so that they can go fast enough so that we can personalize really well? Like that would be really interesting research. But even just the basics of like what we thought made sense 70 years ago for businesses to use from the Bayesian statistical paradigm, like it's not being used. It's like, and if it is, again, it's being considered a trade secret and you can't really talk about it. So I think building up some more skill internally in that specific flavor of statistics, and it's definitely something I'm looking at, is publishing more, like creating more guidelines in that area, because that would help quite a lot.
So, you've been reading up a lot on this, and you have such deep insights. One thing that you feel like just some keynotes to fresh professionals who are just diving into this. What they should they do? A good roadmap maybe would be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think there's a lot of what I see now versus even a few years ago. Because I mentor a lot of people in data science, and especially women who are trying to break in, and it's so helpful to have the right foundation. And a lot of people skip that. They're like, I just want to know the Python libraries or the R libraries that I need to know to do this type of analysis or to mimic what's already been researched. But what people don't know is how to look at a piece of original research and go, this applies to this problem. Let me write it code from scratch, test on my data whether this would help me model this problem. That skill set, I don't know where it went. I mean, I was lucky enough to be at a research university, and so I spent a lot of time with scientists, and they were like, you can code, we'll teach you everything else you need to know, but you can help us build models to predict what we're trying to predict. So I was kind of in the space where I was around scientists and doing science for 20, 30 plus years. And so I had never thought for a minute that I knew more than them, or that, I had some secret superpower. I knew I could code, I knew I could build models, but like, like their expertise is very real. So I think that respect for expertise, like you going in as a data scientist, you have to understand the domain that you're in. And so either you need to partner with people really well, or you need to learn that domain and be extremely good at it to know what's a safe model to try, or what are the assumptions about the data that we need to keep in mind. Because right now people are coming out of boot camps and jumping in and getting data and just running them through the same kind of standard set of algorithms that people say are good. They don't know the assumptions underneath about the data. They don't know the assumptions about the models. They don't know how to change it if something breaks. So the more you focus on the fundamentals, coming from statistics, coming from, probability, coming from mathematics, coming from computational complexity, what can I actually deploy to production? What is the domain that I'm talking about? It's like those things are always, I think, missing for people. And then the other side is sometimes people have domain expertise and they say, but I'm not techie. So I have to relearn all this stuff from scratch. And I'm like, you have domain expertise. You know what's reasonable and unreasonable in your field. That intuition will help you if you just learn these like foundational kind of math and stats and computation pieces. You can do better than someone who's pure technology and they don't really know how to kind of talk themselves up and just bring that in as a skill set and keep moving. They really think, oh, they know something I don't know. So that's the other thing I'd recommend, is owning your domain expertise and seeing how that interacts with how you're developing your technical expertise.
So this is like a good fine line defining data analytics and data science. Like for first, I think one needs to be really apt at the domain and then go into data analytics and then think of the data science models that might work for that particular use case, right?
maybe. There's definitely people I know who would. I mean, there's so many types of data scientists, right? There's people who are basically producing lots of original research about algorithms and AI and machine learning. There's people who are kind of supercharged data analysts. There are people who are 100% building products, nothing to do with analysis or not. They're really just like, I'm building products and I launch products that the experience is generated by data, machine learning, and that type of research, right? So you don't have to do data analysis to do original research in machine learning necessarily. You don't have to go through that pathway. You don't necessarily have to, if you want to build a product with data, you might never even do data. You might just come in as a product manager and just get really strong at it. And you might be a product manager for AI products. That's a huge missing skill set. So there's no like one path, and there's nothing like where you have to go from data analyst to a real data scientist. Like that's not real either. You can just be an analyst, go down the data analysis path and get really good at that. That's going to be a very different skill set from building a product, and that's going to be a very different skill set from producing original research. It just like depends on what type of way do you want to be considered a professional in this field.
So there's this question from our audience, and I feel like it's a really good one to take in. The big retailers who are using AI and data science as a cutting edge technologies, what is the one thing that works that helps them keep up with the cost that comes with big data tools and the research that goes in R&D? So how does that help them with coming at least making how do you say this? Even like meeting up to the operation funds that were invested in it, or maybe getting a good ROI out of that.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as like them keeping up to date, usually the ones who are doing well are like attending machine learning conferences that have nothing to do with fashion, retail, technology, or scale, or any of that stuff. They're going straight to like, what are the AI researchers doing now? How can we use it? Who else is in here in retail? And so I'm seeing more and more as I go to conferences, people who are coming from specific well-known retailers and sitting in the audience and presenting and writing papers and being part of the community, whereas before it was really kind of separate communities. I say the other thing to help them make it profitable is it's always better to simulate something and just like test it than to decide that you need something really fancy. And then it turns out if you just had something really simple, it would do the same thing. So I don't start projects unless we have an idea of what is the expected value of doing this project. Because if the project costs more than you'll ever get from it, you shouldn't do it. But most people don't do that. Sometimes they'll listen to companies that give them estimates from other industries or from other projects that have nothing to do with how the business model of design, of luxury or fashion works. And so they'll think, great, if we invest $1 million into digital transformation, we'll get back at least $1 million. It's going to be amazing. We're bringing all these superheroes in and they're going to change our whole business. And then there's a few things. One, they don't actually set the objectives correctly to like what would give them back the return. Two is that they keep the new kind of lab or data scientists separate, and they're in this whole separate bubble. So they never get the domain expertise they need to decide for themselves what would be good. And then the third thing that happens is, people will build really elaborate platforms that, again, they cost more than they'll make back. And so it takes way longer to see back the return if you spend $1 million on a platform that you could have for 10,000 a month if you really understood how it works, or if you took it in house and just hired a couple people to maintain it. So, and the other thing is talent. Sometimes they're just really bad at keeping talent in house, and they just don't learn the codes about technology. They don't learn how to incentivize people who have these skills, which are desirable. And so people just keep coming in and leaving, and that knowledge doesn't get distributed anywhere. And so those are probably the main reasons I think projects don't work, or they don't pay them back. And so they get really frustrated with it.
So while you're building teams for your particular project, what is the few capabilities or features that you look feature. I keep on saying features. If there's a few traits that you look in an employee or candidate who's joining in your team, what would be some like top three?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, then it's really just about what project am I trying to do. As a consultancy, I if I'm bringing somebody in, then it's because there's something that has to come out. Like it's not just to have someone take some care of something routine, right? So I have to, for myself, I want to understand like what is the difference between the value of my company with and without this person. So that's the biggest question. And as far as like if I'm talking to companies about building teams, I mean, the only rule of thumb I have is that there's no such thing as a single data scientist. Like you need at least two because they're science. If they're scientists, they need to be talking to somebody else, right? You can't. You need peer review. You need to experiment. You need someone to understand your language. So people often hire one data scientist, put them in a corner, and nothing happens. They get frustrated. It's like, well, you need at least. You always need at least two. Like you need somebody to bounce things off of. So the other side of it though is again, it just depends on the company. Some people really, really need to have PhD level in-house and they should not have anybody below the PhD level in there. Or some people are believe that they need PhDs and that would be a terrible idea because they actually really need industry experts. And so
Yeah.
really just every company is different.
You're a really avid reader, Jessica. So, what would be some books that you would recommend to the audience to read?
Oh man. I think everyone should read Richard Hamming. He has a
Mhm.
book called The Art of Doing Science and Engineering, and it talks about the things that nobody will train you on, which is how do you pick good problems? How do you interact with domain experts? How should you think about producing new work? Because people really think it's all about the technical skills and I just need to know these three libraries and I'll be fine. And it's like you're doing if you're trying to use the word data science, you're supposed to be doing science. That means you're supposed to not know the answer. So there's a good way to try to find answers, and there's like a less useful way. And so you might as well learn from the best people about what are the most useful ways I could structure something that is inherently unstructured. And another thing I think people should read. I mean, honestly, again, it just depends on your field, like what things you want to specialize in. There's a lot of great different types of manuals. But I would say that's probably, if I could generically say something to everybody listening, it's like go read that book and learn about the process of doing science and the process of building models because that's the fundamental that everybody needs.
Your journey with Sephiria and as a chief data officer, what were some darkest moments that you faced and how did you come out of that?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I've seen it all, right? Like as somebody who's an employee, like the way people treat you in technology, the way people treat you in fashion, based on how you look, based on where you're from, based on their expectations of you, it's like I've seen it all. I've been through some of the worst things you could have said to you, or people just not expecting anything of you. I've seen every side of that. As far as business owning, it's like again, it's a totally crazy thing to do to start a business. Doesn't You cannot rationalize why it makes sense to make a business. And if anybody tells you can, like they're probably not like you. There's ways to reduce the risk, and there's ways to be organized and have a plan. But fundamentally, you have to be crazy enough to just keep trying until it works. And so the hardest thing for me is like if I think, oh, if I start to get thoughts like, oh, I couldn't make this work, but for the most part, what got me out of all of that was understanding more things about coaching and leadership and professional development, personal development. Like, you know, one side of it is like feeling very solid in what I do. So like always keeping up with literature and trying to keep up with techniques. The other side of it though is understanding how personally your mind works, surrounding yourself with people like coaches, mentors, advisors, knowing how to filter out the wrong information and follow what you need to do. It's like all came from very unstructured personal development people. It was not like here's like an executive coach or here's a guide to be the best data scientist. It was really coming from different modalities that are focused on how the mind works and how change happens and how transformation happens, and getting really good at that and learning a lot about those different techniques.
So there are a lot of times that we fall down, right? What, how do you get the courage and the confidence to stand back up and try it all over again?
I mean, to be honest, like the easiest thing you can do is look around at who's doing well and realize that they don't know as much as you think they should know. I mean, this is like, that's one way. If you have nothing else, you should just start talking to as many people as you can about how they got where they got. Because they'll be like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. And then I came here and then I learned this and I learned that and then slowly got where they were. So like you always just start to ask people their origin stories, and then you start to learn like, oh, well, I've already done that. Why am I not, so you can start to pick up all these tips about how they look like how you are now, and you can actually get there. While also remembering that you're doing, like, nobody knows what you're going to do, so we might as well find out. I mean, you can like give up and be like, I'm not going to try anymore, but it's like, it's like it's not fun anymore. It's like, wouldn't it be so much more fun to figure out what happens than to like stop trying? Like,
That
don't
is
you just want to know? Like, I just want to know.
halfway. Yeah. Once you know what's the like worst that can happen, and then you just you can go ahead and try it anyway.
Yeah, well, and the worst that could happen, right, is that you just don't try. Like, that's the worst that can happen, is you look back and you're like, I didn't even try. And that's so paralyzing. Like meditating on what would happen if you were at the end of your life and you knew it was going to all end tomorrow. What would you be doing? How would you spend your day? Who would you be talking to? What would you want people to say about you? What would you want to have had experience? What do you have to just get out of your system? You can pursue things and you don't have to pursue them for the rest of your life, but it's so important to find out, like, get your dream job as quickly as possible so you can learn that it's probably not your dream job and you can think bigger. So, it's just so much more interesting to find out what actually happens than to stop yourself from finding out.
On that note, if you could redo everything that you have done, what would you do differently?
I'm not sure I would, I don't know. I feel like I refresh myself every day. So, we have a pandemic happening, and, you just get really, you can't expect things to be exactly the same. And it's not that if I know what I know now and I went back, I'm not sure what would have changed. I'm sure there would be changes. I can't guarantee that I'd be in a better place, or I don't know what would have happened. I'm not sure it would do very much different. There's a few and it's hard the things that if you had to explain them to your past self, there's certain things that if you had to explain them to your past self, you just wouldn't believe it until it happened. And so there's some things I think actually just had to happen for me to understand the value. I advise companies all the time, so I try to get them past, making obvious mistakes and kind of reduce the amount of kind of wrong moves they make, or just return them back to best principles. But there's not a ton I could go back and say, like, don't do that. That's a mistake. It's like, how would I know it's a mistake if I didn't do it? And how would I learn from it? And what all this other side knowledge I have now if I didn't try all these different things?
So you going back to your younger self, you wouldn't even listen to yourself?
I don't know. I might be like, that sounds, I mean, the thing is, I think the thing where we miss when we ask that question is, like, people might have told me certain things would or wouldn't work at the time. And I might have heard it already. I might have already, it's not, the thing that is important for us, especially if you're running a business more than anything else. If you want to be an engineer, you should learn the right way to do everything, right? Like, it's the whole other thing. But the things that, the lessons that you learn and the way that we learn those lessons is part of that process. And we think that if we just had this piece of information, we would have done something different. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes even if you had the information, you wouldn't have done it anyway because you didn't understand how that fit. You wouldn't understand why that was relevant to you. until you're like, oh, okay, now I've seen it, I feel it, I've gone through it, and now I can move forward. But if even if I told you, don't do this, this is great, this is dangerous, here's the outcome, I might, who knows if I would have acted on it or not, or the information's not the thing. It's like how it's the way that you show someone how relevant it is to them and make it clear for them and open them up to it. So I have a lot of information. I have tons of business books. I have books from the best consultants. I have books on technology. Like I'm sure in those books that I might have had 2 years ago, there's information about things I could have done different at that time. But I might not have listened to it because I might have been like, that's not relevant. Was that? And then, oh wait, now I've lived it. It's not about what if you had this information. It's like, what if it's a transformative experience that takes you to it. So I like to design ways for my, advisees or people I'm working with or people I'm trying to just help in their career. My job is to create an environment in which they can transform how they believe about things and how they think about things and what they think is relevant to them. Because once you have the right eyes, then the information comes and you can do something with it. But we have tons of information. Probably everything I said is on the internet somewhere. But if you don't think it's relevant to you or how you make decisions or how you should build it into your company or your legacy or whatever else, it doesn't matter if I tell you or not. Like it's just if it doesn't make sense to you.
It's where I have to figure it out myself.
It's just about being comfortable with like taking shots. That's the only thing I'd ever say is like just take more shots. That's it.
So this is last question that we'll take from the audience. The question is, recently some AI startups have built some models that can generate unseen designs. So how far are we from seeing these AI generated designs in the real world?
We've already seen them. So Acme, I think it was Menswear 2020, in January, February had it. They used scans to generate some of the designs. We've seen it on smaller companies. We've seen it companies in Japan for sure, but this is already happening a bit. There are some experiments with it at least 2 years ago at Nuribs. There's like Stitch Fix uses algorithms to generate clothing and then they'll produce it. Amazon's doing something very similar. So yeah, it's there. It's definitely there.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time out for us. We've really had some really insightful information from you, and thank you again for giving us a chance and talking to Odetta.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a great chat.
Thank you. And we'll chat furthermore on email then.
Yeah. Amazing. All right, take care.
So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and you've been an amazing audience. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.